Thank you. Thank you for coming. I think back 2 or 3 months ago, and it was still broad daylight at this time of the evening when we got together, and here we are, the first rumors of snow and a dark and sleety night, so we're grateful that you're here. You know, my name is Casey Watson. I'm the outreach worker here at Murray Street, and I get the privilege of introducing Murray Watson, my father, and his speech tonight called Every Pleasant Road. And sort of the subtitle is Goodness is as goodness does. And it harkens to the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto us. But it also speaks to me particularly because of sort of my project and involvement in Murray Missions. Murray Missions is all about the notion that rather than just declare the good news of Jesus Christ and the good news of the gospel, we should demonstrate it. Rather than just shout that God loves us, we should show that God loves you. And the idea that goodness is not just a state of being, not something that we carry around inside of ourselves, but is a state of activity. It is something that we do, and there's something else, something that other people can join us in doing too. And the Bible tells us clearly that works, the things that we do, are not the pathway to salvation. We're not going to be saved by what we do. But it also tells us that faith without works is dead. And in Matthew chapter 24, it's a piece of scripture that really underlies Murray Missions to me. It's the parable of the sheep and the goats. And it tells us that the King one day will judge us. He will judge the truth and the strength and the honesty of our faith by what we do. Right? And whatever we do for the least of these amongst us, we do for the King, our Savior. Or whatever we don't do for the least of these amongst us. Well, we don't do that for our King either. So surely, goodness is as goodness does. And with that, Dad, welcome this evening. There will be a free will collection taken afterwards, and all the monies collected will go towards supporting the Murray Missions activities here at the church. So, Dad, thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you. Let me ask you a question. Would you say that in your life you have always been traveling on every pleasant road? The week before my mother died, she said to my sister who was looking after her, "Tell me what to do, Dorothy. I want to be good." I don't know about you, but I'd have to admit that in my life journey, I haven't always chosen the good road. My friends, I'd like to share with you a brief glimpse of 3 aspects of goodness. Some observations from ancient wisdom, its connection with health, and how it connects with our feelings when we lay our heads on our pillows. 1. Goodness and ancient wisdom. First, I recall one of the times I caused my mother to suffer for her goodness. It was a few years ago, when I was still in high school, and I had skipped a day, gone AWOL. And I don't know about your situation, but at Norwood High, to get back in after an absence, you had to have a note signed by your parent or guardian. So the next morning, feeling guilty but acting innocent, I asked my mother for a sick note. And only a blind man would not have seen the frustration and hardship that appeared on her face. Around that same time, my father talked about a relative who was rich. Cattle King of Belmont, he was called. That's what I wanted to be. But can getting for oneself produce contentment? I learned the answer to that question when I was farming. And I sold some Holstein heifers to the Fennell brothers. They had a dairy farm on No. 7 Highway, just east of Norwood. They were very happy about their purchase, and they came back a couple years later and wondered if I had any more young cows for sale. How many I ended up selling on this second occasion, I don't recall. What I do recall was buying and selling them several that didn't match up to the quality of the first group that I knew they were expecting, and feeling guilty. That part my conscience would not let me forget. And hearing them say later, they didn't find me as reliable as they had found my father, cut me to the quick. Someone has said, you don't have to believe in the sacred world. It slaps you in the face. It's everywhere. Why didn't I give them an honest apology and a check? I often ask myself the same question. Finally, my conscience drove me to search them out. I learned they had both passed away, leaving no descendants. What was I to do? Knowing I couldn't simply drop it, I found a family in Peterborough by the same name, perhaps distant relatives. After I went to the bank, I visited this family, told them my story, and they agreed to accept what I ought to have given back to their namesakes 40 years earlier. Thomas Jefferson said, "Honesty is the first chapter in the book of wisdom." When I sold my cattle in 1974, I did have 169 head, but I also had a good deal of anxiety. Selfish ambition can take the joy out of life. The boxer Joe Louis said, "I don't like money actually, but it quiets the nerves." No, I did not become Cattle King of Belmont. In his book, Where Dwells the Soul Serene, Stanton Davis Kirkham said, "To persist in doing good is to be ennobled. And it is better to be the founder of a royal line than the degenerate descendant of kings." In Judaism is the story that every man has three friends: his money, his children, and his good deeds. And on the day of his death, only his good deeds can help him. And they say, "Go in peace. We will be there to offer you aid." Goodness is what goodness does. In Hinduism is the story, and I give the longer version in another speech, of a man who asks the village wise man how he can find peace. The wise man gets his serious attention when he tells him he's going to be dead in 10 days. When the man asks if there's anything he can do, he's told to spend his money helping others and spend his time admitting wrongdoing and making restitution to those he has harmed. When he comes back on the 11th day, he is already at peace with God and is simply told to keep doing what he's been doing. Goodness is what goodness does. Jesus said, "Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you." Goodness is what goodness does. In the scriptures of Judaism, what Christians call the Old Testament, there's a verse which says of God, "Thou art good and thou doest good." For the Chinese philosopher Confucius, goodness was the central virtue. For him, it was reciprocity in relationships. The process of making right the moral relationship with others and with heaven. In the Analects, he says, do not do to others what you would not want them to do to you. For the Jewish theologian Martin Buber, relationship was also central. He said the relationship between self and neighbor, and especially between self and God, must change from the fractured world of I and it, meaning me and an object, to the immediate personal state of I and thou. For Jesus, reconciliation in relationships was central. Reconciliation meaning to become one again. He said, if you're at your place of worship and you remember your brother has something against you, go your way. First, be reconciled to your brother. And he said, in summarizing our highest duty, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. My neighbor is identified not as someone else, not my enemy or a stranger, but except for the different body, I believe essentially me. What I do for my neighbor, good or bad, I do for myself. How would you define goodness? Is there one word that sums it up for you? In an old poem, John Boyle O'Reilly says, "What is the real good?" I asked in musing mood. "Order," said the law court. "Knowledge," said the school. "Truth," said the wise man. "Pleasure," said the fool. "Love," said the maiden. Beauty, said the page. Freedom, said the dreamer. Home, said the sage. Fame, said the soldier. Equity, the seer. Spake my heart full sadly, the answer is not here. Then within my bosom, softly this I heard. Each heart holds the secret. Kindness is the word. The Hindu author and scholar Swami Satchidananda says, the greatest joy in life is doing something for somebody else. You don't get joy by doing this. The joy is in you always. Your actions allow you to retain the supreme joy. Or, I think, recapture it if it seems lost to you. Muhammad said, every kind thing is a virtue. To give water to a thirsty person, pick up a stone from the road, to show a traveler his way, all this is virtue. Well, you may be thinking, why do you even put kindness and religion in the same sentence? Especially the Christian religion. Why, in the Crusades alone, up to 250,000 Muslims and Jews, infidels and Christ killers they were called, were mercilessly slaughtered, including women and children, by burning and beheading. That is tragically true. How can we know the unseen God is good? You may ask. Some passages in the Old Testament seem to have God commanding men, women, and children killed. A little girl said, oh, that was before God became a Christian. William Barclay, who told this story, said, God hasn't changed. Man's knowledge of God has changed. The New Testament answer is that God is like Jesus. He who has seen me has seen the Father. And what was Jesus like? He went about doing good. He was moved with compassion, and he healed them all. He speaks with sinners and eats with them. And he told the story of a sheep farmer who searches for the one lost sheep that is lost until he finds it. Every evening, in another story, a father is out on the road looking for his lost son, apparently, because when he sees him coming back, he's on the road and he runs to meet him, throws his arms around his neck and kisses him, interrupts his son's confession, and throws a party. The New Testament is saying God is like that. If merciful kindness were accepted as the substance of religion, can you even imagine calling a crusade against any group? Any more than in 25 years of settling recess disputes, I ever heard a student say, but he was too kind to me, and that's not fair. If compassion became paramount, if members saw themselves as predominantly doers rather than predominantly believers, would unity in this dangerous world increase and division decrease? Christians were first called followers of the way in the New Testament. Doers. In Jesus, we no longer see God so much as a stern judge with a broken law, as we see a loving Father with a broken heart. What have my struggles taught me about goodness? That undoing wrong can be very hard, but not half as hard as not undoing it. I don't know about you, but do you find knowing good easier than doing good? Mark Twain said, to be good is noble, but to teach others to be good is nobler and less trouble. What do the holy books say about goodness? They shout from the rooftops, do goodness to others. Then they whisper in your ear, that's how you get it yourself. Henry David Thoreau said, goodness is the only investment that never fails. And that brings us to part 2, goodness and its connection with health. What effect does goodness have on the emotions and on the body? I'd like to take a very brief look at giving and brain reaction, depression counseling, deception detection testing, and kinesiology or muscle testing. Giving and the Brain. In an interview on CBC Radio in March of 2009, Princeton University professor of bioethics Peter Singer reported that the areas of the brain activated when we have sex are similarly activated when we give. It seems we're hardwired to be kind. In depression counseling, patients are encouraged to express, press out, their feelings. This is based on the same premise, that negative feelings affect our body negatively. Deception detection testing. The September 2007 Toastmasters magazine reported results of a test where different groups, college professors, Secret Service agents, judges, students, competed to identify who were telling the truth and who were not, by observing facial expression. This is based on the assumption that what you say affects your emotions, which show up on your face. Even poker-faced liars have been unable to prevent some display of feelings on the face. The U.S. Secret Service agents responsible for protecting the life of the president won that face-reading contest. Kinesiology, the science of muscle testing. What we say produces emotions, and the emotions produce changes in our bodies. In his book, Power versus Force, psychiatrist David Hawkins bases his conclusions on the intriguing fact, tested numerous times, that our muscles always weaken when we say what we believe untrue. But when we say what we believe true, they always strengthen. And of course, no one claims that acting in a kind and honest way causes poorer health, or that acting in an unkind and dishonest way causes better health. You know yourself how good you feel when you've been able to help someone in as simple a way as giving directions when they're lost on the road. And I know how bad I feel when I gossip about somebody, even when what I say is essentially true. I'm always saying later, why didn't I keep my big mouth shut? For when I omit the good, or do the bad, what results is the darkness of anxiety and guilt. And a dark mood does not make a delightful traveling companion in the journey of life. An electric light company sent out a bill to a client. They wrote, "If you pay your bill by the end of the month, we will be delighted. If not, you will be." What does research suggest about the connection between goodness and health? Doing acts of goodness and saying what you believe true produce positive feelings. And positive feelings produce healthier bodies. Goodness is helpful. Goodness can even help you save on cosmetics. In her novel Wuthering Heights, Emily Bronte has Nellie say to Heathcliff, "A good heart will help you to a bonny face, my lad, and a bad heart will turn the bonniest face into something worse than ugly." Moses' face shone when he came down from the presence of the Lord. After Mark Twain met George MacDonald, he said MacDonald had the face of Christ. Some think that goodness has a special appeal to the young and the old. This may be true, possibly because they tend to have less business and busyness, less noise to interfere with the still small voice inside, the gentle whisper in the mind. A line of a song by Red Foley, "The beast from the wild will be led by a child." Let me read a little story that I found many years ago. I haven't been able to track down the name of the author. I shortened it slightly. It was one of the hottest days of the dry season. We had not seen rain in almost a month. The crops were dying was right first time. Cows had stopped giving milk. The creeks and streams were long gone back into the earth. It was a dry season that would bankrupt several farmers before it was through. Every day, my husband and his brothers would go about the arduous process of trying to get water to the fields. If we didn't see some rain soon, we would lose everything. It was on this day that I learned the true lesson of sharing and witnessed the only miracle I have seen with my own eyes. I was in the kitchen making lunch for my husband and his brothers when I saw my 6-year-old son Billy walking towards the woods. He wasn't walking with the carefree abandon of a youth, but with a serious purpose. I could see only his back. He was obviously walking with a great effort, trying to be as still as possible. Minutes after he disappeared into the woods, he came running out again toward the house. I went back to making sandwiches, thinking that whatever task he had been doing was completed. Moments later, however, he was once again walking in that slow, purposeful stride toward the woods. This activity went on for an hour. Finally, I couldn't take it any longer, and I crept out and followed him on his journey. He was cupping both hands in front of him as he walked, being very careful not to lose what he held. I sneaked close as he went into the woods. Branches and thorns slapped his face, but he didn't try to avoid them. As I leaned in to spy on him, I saw a tiny fawn lying on the ground, obviously suffering from dehydration and heat exhaustion. It lifted its head with great effort to lap up the water cupped in my beautiful boy's hands. When the water was gone, Billy jumped up to run back to the house, and I hid behind a tree. Then I followed him back to the house to a spigot to which we had shut off the water. He knelt there, letting the slow drip drip fill up his makeshift cup as the sun beat down on his little back. And the reason he didn't ask me to help him came clear to me. The trouble he had gotten into for playing with the water hose the week before, the lecture he had received about the importance of not wasting water. It took almost 20 minutes for the drops to fill his hands. When he stood up and began the trek back, I was there in front of him. His little eyes just filled with tears. "I'm not wasting," was all he said. As he began his walk, I joined him with a small pot of water from the kitchen. I stood on the edge of the woods, watching the most beautiful heart I have ever known working so hard to save another life. As the tears that rolled down my face began to hit the ground, other drops, and more drops, and suddenly more joined them. I looked up at the sky. It was as if God was weeping with pride. And that brings us to part 3, goodness and our feelings when we lay our heads on our pillows. When the sun sets on our day, whether the 24-hour day or the day of our life, what do we really wish to feel? Isn't it clean and innocent, like a little child saying a prayer at bedtime? In a word, goodness. What leaves us with that priceless feeling? Isn't it by being scrupulously honest and doing unselfish deeds during the day? Of course, prayer is more than words. James Allen told the story of a young boy who had often heard his father pray for the poor that they might be fed and clothed. One day he interrupted. "Father," said the boy, "if you will lend me the key to your corn crib and wheat bin, I will answer some of your prayers." One of my favorite prayers is by John Windhorst. The little girl prays, "Dear God, please help me and my doggy, my mummy and my daddy, and my brother, and please also don't forget to help yourself. If anything happens to you, we're going to be in a big mess." Yet I have to admit that through most of my life, I've been more devoted to getting than giving. There's a verse in the New Testament that says a man's life does not consist in the abundance of the things that he possesses. And these words, as you know, were spoken by one we evaluate as a most healthy mind, a penniless preacher in Palestine. Someone has defined man as the animal that laughs. A Cherokee proverb says, "There is a battle of 2 wolves inside us all. One is evil. It is greed, anger, jealousy, lies, inferiority, and ego. The other wolf is good. It is kindness, love, empathy, humility, hope, truth, peace, and joy. The wolf that wins? The one you feed." But what if I say I'm just fine and I owe others nothing? Turn it around. Would I want others to claim they owe me nothing? I'm really acknowledging that I owe good to others if I believe others owe good to me. And who doesn't? Just wait until somebody does you a bad turn. For example, in 1993, I was admitted to the psychiatric ward of a Toronto hospital, and within 1 week was put on 4 strong drugs. When I was discharged, I still had my depression, plus several other problems, including short-term memory loss. That's why I have to keep these notes handy. I believed they owed me goodness. And I can't believe others owe me goodness without believing I owe goodness to others. In fact, I doubt the human mind even could believe oneself good if one were not regularly doing good deeds for others. For that would be an incompatibility, something the mind can't hold. Stanton Davis Kirkham said, "Whoever works for good is sustained by good. The service is reciprocal." And he continues, "In the event of our lost opportunities being marshaled before us, we would doubtless be astounded and chagrined at the disclosure. So numerous are they, so simple in character. We passed through a field of flowers and saw them not. Children would pass before us. Children whose smiles we did not see. Men who asked nothing, and to whom we should have given. Those in need of kind words, for whom we had none. The child would be there that hungered for the affection we withheld." In his story, The Mansion, Henry Van Dyke tells about a rich banker who falls asleep on Christmas Eve, and in a dream wakes up in the next world. He is surprised to see one man, who on earth could hardly keep body and soul together, directed to a lovely hillside mansion, while he is directed to a little hut away down in the valley. Perplexed, he is assured that all the building materials he sent on ahead were used, and there was enough to build only a small hut. Building materials? What you do for others on earth. He wakes up, talks with his son, and makes some important changes in his life. As we approach the end, we've looked at goodness in the journey of life, at some observations from spiritual wisdom, at its connection with health, and at our deepest feelings. I don't know about you, but I know my physical and emotional health would have been much better and more stable if I had spent all my time doing positive good rather than having to undo the wrong. Seth Godin, who has developed what is called permission marketing as opposed to the interruption marketing we're all so accustomed to on the internet and TV, and who calls a remarkable product or service a purple cow, also the title of one of his books, says, "Instead of wondering when your next vacation is, maybe you should set up a life you don't need to escape from." For goodness is not about getting, but about giving. Not demanding fairness, but asking forgiveness. Not a dollar sign, but peace of mind. And attaining that peace of mind is possible for anyone. It doesn't require perfection. As Norman Vincent Peale used to say, attitudes are more important than facts. We may know that baseball great Babe Ruth set the home run record. Do we also know he set the strikeout record? But he didn't let that worry him. He said, "Every strike brings me closer to my next home run." George MacDonald, in his novel The Vicar's Daughter, has Marion say, "To be good is the only way to get near anybody. When you're naughty, Willie, you can't get near your mama, can you?" And Shakespeare said, "How far that little candle throws its beams, so shines a good deed in a naughty world." I'd like to read you a short story written by some guy by the name of Watson, titled The Wheelbarrow. A man came home late and angrily woke up his young son. "How many times have I told you to put things away where they belong? I almost ran over that overturned wheelbarrow. Now why did you leave it in the laneway? Now get up and get it and put it behind the house." "Daddy," said the boy, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes, "I put the wheelbarrow there because—" "Have you forgotten what I said about him making excuses?" The young boy at once got out of bed and started dressing. "Daddy, would you please come with me? You know I'm scared of the dark." Tears were now streaming down the soft cheeks, and his voice didn't sound right. "You left it there, sissy, go get it yourself." His mother, overhearing her husband's voice, went to the closet and took down her son's windbreaker and a sweater for herself. Then she bent down and pulled out 2 pairs of rubber boots, as there were still puddles everywhere. A driving, drenching, destructive storm had started 2 nights earlier and only ended at noon. She handed him his jacket and, noticing the tears on his face, stayed by him as she put on her sweater and buttoned it up. He started to explain. "Mummy, you weren't home, and I was going to tell you," she put a finger to her lips. "It's okay, son," she said, intending to comfort him. Then she went to get the big flashlight. Just before the school bus had brought their son home, the daughter of her best friend and closest neighbor had come across country asking for help. They had quickly taken the same shortcut through the fields at the back of their small farm, instead of walking out the laneway and taking the road. When she got back home, her son was already in bed. He was one of those children who obey their parents. Exhausted, but holding the light in one hand and her son's hand in the other, she and her boy began walking up the long, narrow dirt laneway. The dark trees whispered mysteriously. Thunder whimpered in the distance. When they came to the overturned wheelbarrow, and just beyond it the small car, they stopped. She was beginning to hand the light to the boy, but he was already bending down, grasping the handles lying in the mud. Small as he was, it didn't take long to turn it right side up. Now it was the mother's turn to cry. For where the wheelbarrow had been, there was a gaping, washed-out hole. She could see in an instant that had the boy not covered this cavity, the front corner of their small car would have dropped in and taken serious damage. Trying to stifle her sobs, she wrapped her free arm around her boy and pulled him close. Then, with the boy pushing the wheelbarrow and his mother showing the way, they started back home. The branches of the trees reached out to touch them with friendly fingers. The young boy put the wheelbarrow behind the house and went back to bed, and his mother went to the living room where her husband lay on the couch. He started to say, "What do you want?" but she only motioned to him. Thinking it must have been something quite important, he got up and followed her out of the house and into the narrow driveway. When they approached the car and his eyes followed the beam of light down into the deep pit, he uttered the sacred name. When he caught himself, he said quietly, "Good grief." On their way back home, he was quiet. New feelings were stirring in his heart. Automatically, he put his cap on the peg, bent down and pulled off each of his rubber boots, and then immediately, although slowly, because he was finding it hard to see, found his way into the narrow hallway and to his son's bedroom. After knocking softly, he quietly opened the door. Well, what he came here for could wait until morning, for their son was sleeping the sleep of the innocent misunderstood, and his father had decided who he wanted to become. As he was gently closing the door, he noticed tacked on the wall, above the boy's head, at the end of the small cot, a picture of himself and his boy, and the wheelbarrow. It was when he was splitting the wood, and his son had insisted on helping him by wheeling the firewood to the lean-to shed against the side of their house. That night in the country, in a little house both unpretentious and unremarkable, 3 people slept the sleep of the just. A little boy who used a wheelbarrow to keep his father from having an accident with the car, a tired woman who, having just helped bring her best friend's new son into this world, encouraged her own without one unkind word to her husband, and a man who was inspired to become a better father because his innocent son had simply done what he thought was right and did not insist on justifying himself. And that's the story of how a young boy who turned over a wheelbarrow helped turn over a life. At the end of the day, what do our deepest desires tell us about goodness? That goodness is our deepest desire, and that on the journey of life, goodness is as goodness does. I don't know about you, but it seems to me we can only get to travel on every pleasant road by taking Goodness Boulevard. More important than a bottom line, more precious than a silver mine is goodness, yielding peace of mind. "Tell me what to do, Dorothy," said my 95-year-old mother. "I want to be good."